affect the June primary, but it could go into effect the day after the June primary for any runoff election.
Right. And now the other question is that subject to our specifying that it might not, well, let's see where we go in the discussion. So I turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Supervisor. To the board for comment, Supervisor Pinches.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to keep my comments really quick, although I don't want to really go through this line by line because I have a lot of problems with it. It says the purpose of this chapter is to address the problem of excessive or improper influence, real or perceived, exercised by campaign contributors over elected officials. You know, in Mendocino County, actually, I've probably been involved in more elections than anybody in, not more, but enough. But I don't see the problem. I don't see this undue influence. Yeah, people try to, through donations and contributions, try to influence elections. That's what America's all about. But I don't think that we have an undue problem in Mendocino County. Your highest level races, Board of Supervisors, even the Sheriff's Office, I mean, the amount of contributions from both sides aren't overwhelming. And this outside influence, I don't see it. And another point, I don't believe that it passes the muster of freedom of speech by limiting. That's been, I think, been a court case that's proven to where you can't. That infringes upon your freedom of speech if you're telling somebody that they can't donate to somebody or some campaign cause. So I think it's, I got some real problems. First of all, one that says the outside contributions, the section in here, that if it's over $1,000 from an outside entity, then that money has to be sent to the treasurer's office. Well, let's say I was a person from out of the county that sent somebody $500, and how would I know that if a campaign cause or a person run for office hadn't got, say, 10 other campaign contributions from outside interests, and now they won't take my money. I mean, I can't send my money, or I sent my money to that candidate, and the candidate can't take it, and so they don't send my check back. They're going to take that money and deposit in the county treasury. If I sent a check and it was made out, say, for the campaign of Supervisor Colfax, how could they take that check and deposit that check in the county treasury? They can't do it. So, I mean, I could go, there's a whole bunch of problems I have with this, but in order to move this along, I don't think we have a problem in this county. I don't think we need to have another overlapping. We have a lot of campaign finance reform. In my opinion, campaign finance reform only comes from can only come from the candidate. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like a motion just to deny it, table this, or whatever, because I come down here and spoke against this when it was on in '96 before I was elected, or not '96, but 2006, and I'm just totally opposed to adding another layer of campaign finance reform, basically for two reasons. Number one, I don't think we have the problem, and number two, I don't think that it can pass the muster of meeting our constitutional right to freedom of speech.
Okay, Supervisor, would you entertain, I do have one public comment card before you entertain any motions.
Fine, that's fine, but I just want that motion to be on the floor.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so there is a motion and a second to basically drop this item. I think restating that paraphrase, and there is a second. So let's move to comment, and then we'll take a vote on that. So any additional comment? Yes, Supervisor Smith, I believe was first, and then Supervisor Kovacs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that there really can be, not always is, but there can be undue influence with respect to contributions in the county. And I reference not particularly the supervisorial races, but the county-wide races, the DA and sheriff races in the past, a number of times have been very contested. And I believe at least one candidate in the last election for sheriff spent over $150,000. That's quite a sum for this small rural county. And as being a member of this committee and working on what these limitations would be, we had a lot of debate back and forth, and there were many folks that really wanted them to be far lower than they are now in the document in front of us. And I didn't support that because I felt that was too restrictive, and you do need money to run campaigns, and I just didn't agree with that, and I felt that there would be more wide support if we had higher limits. And Supervisor Wattenberger also shared that committee assignment with me, and we went into quite a bit of detail on it. I think it's something the reason it got into committee, because it was something that the public came forward. It wasn't my idea or Supervisor Wattenberger's idea. The public came forward and said, gee, we think that this is something you ought to be looking at. And sure, maybe folks really are wanting to focus at the national level, and we have little ability to really have an effect on that issue, and that's been thrown around quite a bit. But on the local level, I think it has the potential of really instilling more confidence in the electorate for the process if we have some limitations that are fairly broad. And I think these are pretty broad, and they apply to each cycle of an election. So there would be the primary and there would be the runoff. So all the limits would start all over again in a second race. So I think that we spent quite a bit of time. I believe that Supervisor Wattenberger actually, in our last discussion, infused one change in it, as I recall, moving it, wasn't it, Supervisor Wattenberger, from 500 to 1,000? And I believe that was the change in terms of what went forward and what we voted on. And I think that that's reasonable. And I think most people would think it's reasonable, and it's reasonable in the context of Mendocino County and the type of county we are. And I just think it helps sort of level the playing field and keeping the process to one with some certain constraints and containment. And I don't think it's excessive. I think having $1,000 from any one individual or I believe it says organization or candidate or candidate committee, and then limiting outside contributions to $5,000 from outside the county, and then limiting the specific district races, meaning supervisorial, to 30,000 in each election period. Again, that would be 60,000 if it was going to be a scenario of a runoff. And then doing the same for the countywide offices and making it a limit of 50,000, meaning it would be a total of 100,000 in the situation of a runoff. So I think that those are reasonable caps, and it just instills more support from the citizenry to the process. And I don't think it's excessive, and I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Colfax.
Well, I just wanted to specifically respond to concern of Supervisor Pinch's, and that is that when we see what's happening in the rest of the state, particularly in north counties here, where some of the issues become sharpened and so forth, we see campaigns for supervisors positions going up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when it gets to that point, then you have to say, well, what's the potential here for causing that kind of direction? There's no reason right now why we couldn't be inundated by a candidate who, for one reason or another, has a particular item and has some well-heeled supporters, who simply comes in and sets a new standard. And if you go into the race for a supervisor or for many of these other positions, you go into it with the expectation that you'll have a relatively level playing field. And when you simply have to spend a lot of your time in a campaign raising money,